Welcome to Conflict to Connection, the podcast that helps families navigate separation with compassion and understanding. I'm Mitch, a child consultant at Civilized Separations, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Bill and Bella. Together, we tackle tough conversations about divorce, co-parenting, and creating healthier family dynamics. Whether you're navigating a separation or just looking for better ways to connect, this podcast is here to guide you every step of the way. Today, we're joined by Samantha Woodham, who practices family law as a barrister for now almost 20 years, along with fellow barrister Harry Gates, who she co-founded the Divorce Surgery, the first service in the UK to create joint family law advice. Her work challenges the traditional adversarial model of divorce by incorporating one lawyer, one couple structure. So welcome to our podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No, that's all right. Well, let's start kind of with the basics. So you're a very successful barrister and very much kind of in that traditional system of family law. What was that moment that you knew that something kind of needed to change from what you'd seen?
So I'd been practicing when I decided to set up the Divorce Surgery. I'd been practicing for over a decade, always advising one side or the other on divorce in relation to their finances or children. And I think when you're involved in a system, it's sometimes quite hard to take a bird's eye view of it. But having said that, it was just really obvious from the get-go that there was something fundamentally difficult about trying to get a family or a couple to reach an agreement when you're only ever hearing one side of the story. And the Divorce Surgery came about because I was approached by a couple myself who said, look, Sam, we actually both want to instruct you. We can tell you what our finances are. We've got a spreadsheet. We can tell you all about our children.
Wow.
And we just want to know what the answer is and what's legally fair. Now, I assumed that that was impossible because the kind of view had been up to that point for centuries that solicitors or barristers couldn't advise a couple together on divorce because of conflict of interest.
Yeah.
But it made me interested in the idea, and I thought, why can't we? And I started reading around and realised that in other countries like France and the Netherlands and Italy, it's actually normal for couples to start with one lawyer, to share a lawyer, and then they only go to separate lawyers if they have to. And I thought, well, why can't we have that here? And so I pursued it, and I investigated it with the Bar Council and the Bar Standards Board, and it turned out that actually couples can share a lawyer. And so I set up the Divorce Surgery, and that was in 2018 with Harry Gates. He's another barrister. And at the time, it was very controversial, a bit heretical. But actually, you know, time shows that it's turned out to be something that couples really want, and loads of other law firms have followed suit. And now one couple, one lawyer, which is the model we developed. When we first started it, it wasn't even a search term, like it wasn't even something that existed as people searched. And now if you put it into Google, you'll find stacks of law firms offering it. But that's where it all came from. It actually came from somebody asking for it.
Yeah. And it's actually fascinating that this has kind of already been done in other countries, but we just didn't pick it up.
Yeah.
That we never saw it as something that could be possible here. And I think that's what we see time and time again with the kind of family law scene in the UK, is that we don't really pick up on these new things or new fads that are coming through, especially in other countries. I mean, we've seen the same in Australia. You've come from Australia, where kind of it's quite different there as well.
Yes, absolutely. And unashamedly relational or therapeutic, so comfortable with offering a process that isn't just about, you know, administering law, but more take into account why do people feel the way they do and what's happened, how could things be different. So it does seem to be that England's been a little slow.
Yeah. And so why do you think that in the UK we're kind of so hooked on this binary version of what divorce can be, and this kind of winners and losers? I know people are obviously asking for it, and there's some that are out there that are willing to do it, but I still think there's that idea that there is only winners and losers in divorce. And when you think of divorce, people don't have the best reaction to it in the UK. Why do you think that is?
I think that divorce is still highly stigmatized. I think there's a big overlay of shame. Even though 42% of marriages end in divorce. This is a normal life change that so many people go through, like changing a job, like moving to a different part of the country, but we stigmatize this one. And I think when you are approaching something that is new and you're coming from a place of fear,
Yeah.
it's those first interactions actually with professionals, with what your friends say, what your family says, is so pivotal for people. And it's a deep-rooted fear that you're not going to be the same kind of parent that you were before, the fear about money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the kind of fear that stops you sleeping. And so if you are told in that moment, you've got good reason to be fearful and you know, and we're going to channel this through litigation, then you'll stay in a place of fear. And actually what you need to understand as quickly as possible is that if you're approaching divorce, that is a normal life change that lots and lots of people navigate. You are still a parent 100% of the time in the way that you were before. And all that the legal process is trying to do is to get you to a place financially which is fair and meets your needs and meets your former partner's needs. And from a children's perspective, enables your children to continue their family life. And if you recognize that actually that is the aim and that you have a shared aim in that, then you're not approaching it from a place of fear. But if you feel like it's some kind of manipulative mind game that you can win, that you can tactic and you can strategize, and I can tell you as a family law barrister that is not the case.
Yeah.
And all that will happen if that's your approach is you'll spend a lot more money on lawyers and have less to go around at the end of it. But if you approach it in that way, then you don't stand a chance of getting to that mindset, which will get you through it much quicker.
Yeah. So do you find that kind of shifting to this shared advice, shared lawyer standpoint is better for not just the couple, but kind of the whole ecosystem of the family going forward in terms of the separation and then after as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think trouble is with the legal process is actually lawyers have been given far too much involvement in it. And really, when you step back, if you had a kind of blank sheet of paper, you'd realize that a breakup is so much about emotions. And really, the law is just there saying, right, we need everybody to be able to be housed and to meet their income needs. And we need the children to be able to, provided that it's safe, have a relationship with both parents. That's all the law is there to do.
Yeah.
And so if you try and take it back to basics, you know, when Harry and I set up the divorce surgery, we thought, oh gosh, you know, if you gave us a case and you gave us the facts, we could analyse it. Any barrister, any solicitor could analyse it and say this is the likely outcome. Wouldn't that be a great service for people to know that and get it from an impartial lawyer? But actually what we've realised is that we do something more important than that, which is that at the very beginning, we give a couple a narrative that they can tell their children, they can tell their friends, they can tell their family, which is, we're sharing a lawyer. This is not going to be a drama. Please don't pick sides. We're trying to get to an impartial answer. And then once we've got that, we're going to implement it. So we start them on a mindset track, which is a much more positive one than saying, no, we're with separate lawyers. And inevitably, when you're with separate lawyers, you then can't share the advice because of privilege. So you're in silos. And it immediately encourages this picking sides.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting when you're talking about that. I felt as though after a lot of what we've talked about is quite similar in terms of kind of starting out the divorce process with a mindset that's completely different than when they came in the door. So they kind of walk in the door and they believe it's a certain way. It's going to go a certain way, you know, I hate so-and-so and they're this, that, and the next thing. And then you kind of stand there and you go, well, actually, we could do this in a completely different way than you thought in the first place. And if we're doing this cooperatively, you can tell your friends that we're doing it cooperatively, that it's going to go better in the long run. You can tell your kids that we're, you know, we have a standpoint here and we're together and united on that, which is something that we constantly say in mediation as well, that, you know, when you kind of talk to the kids about things, you want to come from a united standpoint. You want to be able to, as much as you can, come from the standpoint of saying, look, we're the adults in this situation. We're going to handle it and we're going to move forward together. May look slightly different, may be slightly different, but we've got a handle on things and we're doing it together. And I think that makes a huge difference for the kids as well.
Yeah. I was thinking that when you were talking just then, Sam, about how to a large extent it depends on the attitude of the client. So if you've got people who are kind of insisting on something really adversarial, then in a way, I suppose the implication is that if people want something adversarial, then they should have it. Is there like a sense perhaps that even if they want it, they should be perhaps given an opportunity to kind of think differently about that? Would that be outside what you'd want to do?
So I'm an optimist, and I really question whether anybody going into divorce wants an adversarial process. But they may well end up with one if that's all they're given as a choice. And it's really interesting when people say, oh gosh, I bet the people that come to the divorce surgery are all like Gwyneth Paltrow, and they're conscious uncouplers and they skip through the door. And actually we barely get any people who are like that, because you're getting divorced. It's you've decided that you've got different outlooks for the rest of your life. An expression that you use that I love, Bill, a lot is that this is a relationship which was once working for you and it's now failing you. It's awkward, and you're trying to decide these big decisions about money and children. Most people aren't getting on at all. Quite often, the only thing that aligns them in terms of sharing a lawyer is cost. So the one thing they can agree on is, we don't want to spend a fortune on lawyers. And the benefit of a shared lawyer is you have a fixed fee. Mm-hmm. So you know how much you're going to spend. You can budget for divorce. And quite often that's the only thing that couples will agree on.
That's the only reason why they're like, we can come here because of this.
Because of the cost. And so I do see a lot of couples that would probably end up in quite a litigious divorce if they hadn't gone to a shared service, which is motivated by a cost concern. I think it's, from thinking back to my time in private practice, acting on one side or the other, I don't think I ever actually had a client who wanted to be in litigation. I just had a huge amount of clients who couldn't understand why the other side was being so unreasonable and why they couldn't reach an agreement. And that wasn't because they were intrinsically unreasonable. It was just because litigation drives you apart. And the process of a negotiation where you're having to start necessarily at the outer edge of the bracket because you're going to meet somewhere in the middle just encourages people to believe that there is one right answer, which is theirs, and one wrong answer, which is the other's, when in fact they're both shades of grey of right.
Yeah. So it's kind of already creating that mindset that we're working together. So, they come in because of the cost benefit, but they actually benefit in the fact that it's a slight mind shift change. They're not being dragged down a route that's as adversarial. So, they're not then ending up in a situation that they didn't want in the first place.
And it's sort of keeping the lawyer bit in the lawyer box, which is that lawyers aren't therapists. We're there, in my view, to help people understand what a fair legal outcome is and to get agreement on that and get them out of the legal process as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. And so it's a really do no harm attitude, I think.
Yeah.
In that I just don't think people should leave a legal process in a worse space than they enter it. And we signpost people all the time to therapists and co-parenting experts and separation counsellors to do that good work if they want it.
Yeah.
But if they don't want it, that's fine too. I just don't think we should make things worse.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in terms of the kind of one lawyer, one couple, do you feel as though that's enough in terms of making that kind of big shift in this like very deep entrenched system that is UK family law? Do do you want to see more change that's going in that direction, and what could that be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I think it's a big change.
Yeah.
And it's encouraging that lots of other law firms are now offering it. I think that recognises the fact that it's what people want. I think always the biggest shifts when you've got, quite a traditional legal framework and system, the shifts are going to come because consumers demand change. That's what will drive change. And so I actually think the more interesting narratives aren't what's happening within the legal profession, but what's happening in general media. The fact that, and I'm not a brilliant football person, but Pep Guardiola recently, the fact that he shared a lawyer for his divorce with his wife. And I think that those sorts of examples, the more that we can see examples of other couples approaching divorce in a different way, the more that will shift the mindset. Because, as I say, that there's one thing I'm pretty sure that everyone agrees on, which is that they don't want to spend lots of money on lawyers. So the more that we can show people that that's possible and still end up with a fair result and still ensure that your long-term financial position is protected, that you're not compromising on anything by doing it, you're just saving cost and saving stress. I think the more that wider societal narrative shifts, and that's where the media has a massive role to play, because that kind of war of the roses, clickbait stories are just really, really, really unhelpful. If you're waking up on day one post-separation and scared about this whole new world ahead of you, and you're seeing stories in the press of people litigating for 5 years, and that's not helping you. What's helping you is hearing about other people who've just done it in a really low-key way, and it's not been a disaster, and they're happier now than they were before. Those are the sorts of narratives that people need to hear.
Yeah, I suppose it's hearing that people can be happy after separation and can be happy during separation as well. That it doesn't have to be this, oh my gosh, I'm ripping my hair out. This is absolute hell. I can't believe that everyone's going to feel down and they're going to feel upset, and they're going to go through those emotions. Absolutely. But for the fact that the system doesn't have to make it worse would be a mile difference. And for the divorce surgery, how do they, in looking at this from kind of more of a mediation standpoint, how do they kind of support couples to become better co-parents in the long run? So we've kind of talked about the fact that they're shifting mindset and going into it kind of together, as we were saying, but what I have an interest in is kind of more of a long-term shift that they would have, because that's the kind of what we want to create, is this really long-term shift in their mindset in order to be 10, 15 years down the line and still be kind of in a good space with each other. So for separating couples, how do you support them to become the better co-parent, I suppose?
So I think what's interesting about when it comes to arrangements for children is that if you're two parents and you're approaching divorce, you will be so worried that this divorce is going to be damaging for your children. And all of the research shows consistently that it isn't divorce that causes children emotional harm, it's exposure to parental conflict. Yeah. So this separation could be the best thing you do for your children. It's just about how you approach it. And quite often, parents can think that the law sets out set answers in terms of what the division of care should be. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. The law has very few of the answers that you need. And generally, parents can put in place their own systems. They just need support to find them. So what I find actually at the divorce surgery is when it comes to finances, people want to know what's the fair answer, and that is very law-based, and it's statute and case law and it's interpretation and it's the numbers, and then it's coming out with an answer. But when it comes to the children, actually what we find is that what most couples really need is a sit down at the beginning with a shared solicitor, and we offer these co-parenting consultations, which are just one-off meetings, is understanding that actually this is what the law says, and the law isn't the answer here. Courts are not going to be the right place to resolve the future long-term care of your children. You are the absolutely perfect people to resolve this, but you'll likely need some help. And that's where people like Bill come in. But it's really helping people understand that lawyers aren't the people you need when it comes to arrangements for your children. And, increasingly the courts are trying to reinforce this. So the president of the family division now sends a letter out. When anybody makes a court application, they get a letter from the most senior family judge in the country saying, please don't come to court unless you have to, because actually you are the best people to resolve the arrangements for your children. And here are lots of other ways that you can do it that don't involve the courts. So I actually think quite often when it comes to arrangements for children, the best thing people can know is what does the law say, and actually what's the best way of us resolving this. And it's often not with lawyers.
Yeah.
Do you think it's therefore about not so much actively being involved in the discussion about how the relationship between the parents might be better, but more nudging people in a direction where they might get assistance of that?
Well, it depends where they're at. So, I've had situations where a couple came to me, this is a few years ago, and I did a session with the two of them. And the father was on the verge of making a court application. And the children hadn't had any overnight staying time with the father. And there were no safety, welfare reasons why not. It was just said to be down to the children's views. And it was very, very easy to see where this was going to go, which would be prolonged and quite uncomfortable litigation for the family. And the children were young teenagers, they would have been involved in it. And so I was sort of brought in as a last-ditch attempt. And in that situation, from a barrister's perspective, it's a really wonderful opportunity to sit down with a couple together where they're on the brink and they don't realise quite what they're on the brink of, and explain to them, look, this is how it will play out. And explaining to mum, that there are no safety or welfare concerns here, that this will end up likely with this sort of order. And then explaining to dad, but this is a piece of paper at the end of the day. And if you don't take your family with you, then you're going to spend the rest of their childhood trying to enforce it. And so actually what we need to do is we need to recognise and suddenly get a forward view of what the next 5 years look like, and they look horrible. So let's not go there. Yeah. And let's look at other options, and then taking them through together, which I did all of the research. And there's some wonderful stuff by the Family Youth Justice Board about children who've been through court proceedings, what it's done to them, reading all of their quotes together, understanding that, and then saying, okay, well, how do we row back from this? Like, where do we go? And it was really clear in that particular situation that each needed to recognise the other's fear and give something. So, dad was terrified of being marginalised as a parent. Mum was really upset that she felt that essentially dad was saying, I'm done with you. I don't want a relationship with you anymore. I just want a relationship with the children. And so really what they needed was, and I think I may have sent it to you, but was, co-parenting work so that they could build that co-parenting relationship. And dad needed to sign up for that. And mum needed to encourage the children to go and stay with him, to show him that she was trying. And the following weekend, the kids went to stay with dad. They started doing co-parenting work. There was no litigation. Yeah. So I do think that you can have strong lawyer intervention. Yeah. But I think it depends where they're at. And some people don't need that. For some people, that's too much. That's too heavy-handed. Yeah. And actually, they just need a little nudge in the right direction, and then they can agree it themselves with a little help.
I guess I wanted to kind of explore, because I'm really interested in how so many people in this world aren't really happy with what's happening and would like it to be different. And I'm kind of interested in the sort of struggle that they have in terms of how they get to either accept it as it is or push back or deal with it differently. I'm kind of curious about. You must on occasions be thinking to yourself, I'd really like to do more, and maybe some part of you thinking, but I won't. And on that occasion, somehow or other, the scene allowed you to. The nature of the mum and the nature of the dad, or where they were at, or something, allowed you to say to yourself, I think I'm going to.
I don't think I have got a situation where I felt held back at all, actually. I think that's when I was in private practice and acting on one side, and I think there's an expression, you get the lawyer you deserve, but I think I'd always be brought into cases because I have a very settlement-driven approach, and I'd always be looking for the settlement. And I'd always be really, really interested in finding out about the other partner.
Yeah.
I'd be spending a lot of time talking about that to try and figure out where settlement would be. And then, in a shared lawyer context, obviously you have that freedom that you're with the couple together and you're able to say, look, I believe this is where it's going. In my experience, this is likely to be a fair outcome. And so it is extremely freeing, actually, because you're just saying what you think the answer is.
I suppose I had this vision when you were talking about this case where you found on that occasion that you had an opportunity to be quite influential.
Yeah, well, I think in every case you're influential. But I think the issue is what you don't want to do is if, a couple are just walking in and saying we'd like to agree the arrangements for our children, it's less is more. So it's, okay, brilliant. Have you got an idea of what you want? If they might be nearly there, and then it's just, well, let's draw up a parenting plan. So you don't need to launch into, well, you could go into litigation. They didn't even need to know that narrative. Yeah. And so it's sort of, again, it's going back to the do no harm principle when you're a lawyer, and just as little intervention as is required to get people where they need to be. And it's extraordinary how many families and couples will start out, and they're nearly there, actually. Yeah. They just need a little bit of help. And it's their instinct. Sometimes they just need reassurance that they're the right ones. But an awful lot of families, particularly when it comes to the arrangements for their children, start out from a place of just wanting to agree it and to be nearly there. And they don't need a lot of legal involvement. And I guess that's what I'm kind of saying, is that I don't think we should. I think sometimes a lawyer's job is really saying, guys, you got this.
Yeah.
You don't need lawyers. Yeah. You're there. It's
kind of in listening to you talk about that, I feel like we're kind of all very similar on the idea that this is the route that people should be going down and how we feel about it. But you see time and time again that this doesn't happen for couples, and when they go to the divorce surgery, that will happen for them and they're able to kind of be less adversarial and all this. But I feel like a lot of couples miss out on this and they end up down these routes that are just completely the wrong road for them. Is this on the basis of lawyers having the being told that this is the way that they should go, or that they should go to courts, or they should tell other couples to go to courts? Why does this happen most of the time? What were, in your experience, and probably more in the private practice that you were doing before, why do people end up down this route?
Well, there are some cases that need court intervention.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to recognise that the courts are there as a protective measure for cases involving abuse or where safety is at risk. And there are also some decisions that are extremely difficult and binary, and they can still be mediated. But, if one parent wants to move to Australia with the child, and there can be very difficult cases to resolve. And so some of them need litigation. And I think it's important to recognise that the world that, certainly I would see as a family law barrister acting on one side or the other, the sort of microcosm that I was in felt like every case was a really hard case. But that's because all I got were really hard cases, and they didn't represent the majority of people approaching divorce and separation. And I think that's what's an interesting takeaway for somebody if they're, waking up this morning and realizing that their relationship has come to an end. It's knowing that actually the cases that fight hard in court for years on end are not the norm. That's not normal.
Okay.
And people who end up in that situation either have very, very unfortunate dynamics that potentially could have been changed if the divorce had started differently, but potentially couldn't because there are unsafe dynamics there that require court intervention. So it's always really difficult, I think, when you're assessing. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, if nobody ever needed to go to court. We never had any litigation in families, but there is some litigation that's necessary. What I think we need to all do as professionals working in this environment with people who are deeply distressed is make sure that the only people who end up in court environments are ones that have to be there.
And in your kind of experience, and when you talk to people probably at events or other things like that, do people tend to agree with that, or other lawyers or barristers tend to agree with that? And if that's the case, I know that a lot of people are taking up what you've already put down, which is great, but it's still slow progress, unfortunately. And why do you feel like people haven't really, not everyone's kind of holding on to it like we might be?
Why isn't everyone going to the divorce?
Yeah, exactly.
The question you asked.
I think that if you spoke to family lawyers and judges, my goodness, the vast majority of them would say if they were approaching divorce themselves, the last place they'd want to end up at is in court. But I think it's great that shared legal advice is growing. I think we just need to recognise that this is a centuries-old adversarial process, and that it is harder, actually, to get people to buy in to shared legal advice than solo legal advice. Because if you think about it, if your relationships come to an end and it's really awkward, best case scenario is it's just really awkward. And if there's a way of you being able to say, I don't need to deal with the other person because this is really awkward. So I'm just going to get a lawyer and I'm just going to get them to figure it out.
Everything out, yeah.
Exactly. And then there'll be an answer. Then that's really tempting.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, okay, no, I'm going to recognise that this is a shared process and, it needs to involve some element of collaboration between the two of us. That's a harder sell.
It's recognising that you're also part of it as well. I think that's quite a hard thing for people to do.
It's really tempting to but the problem is that you can't. I think the one thing I wish people knew is you can't delegate your divorce. You can't. So as tempting as it is to say, this is massively orcs and I just want my lawyer to deal with everything. Ultimately, where do you need to get to? On the finances, you need to get to a consent order which has been approved by a judge as being a fair financial division. If you don't get to a consent order, which is an agreed order, you're going to end up litigating in court. So you don't want that. So how are you going to reach agreement? Well, you're only going to reach agreement if you have some form of negotiation with each other. So the sooner you know what impartial fair looks like, the sooner you can both go, actually, you know what, can we sign up for this? Because if we can, then it's all over and we're done. And negotiating actually on finances with your ex is massively awkward and difficult. And so if you can find a way of not having to negotiate, then brilliant. And sharing a lawyer, weirdly, is a way to not negotiate. Because if somebody just tells you what fair is on the finance side, and you both look at that and think, well, it's not perfect, it's not exactly what I wanted, but I can live with it, then you're done. Whereas if you delegate and you say, no, we're each going to have a lawyer because we don't want to talk to each other.
There's so much more work that's going on.
But your lawyers don't know. They're negotiating with their arm tied behind their back. They know what your parameters are. They don't know what your ex's parameters are. They don't know what really matters to them. So it makes, best case scenario, it's just a more drawn out negotiation process.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, it's entrenching division and
It's like
mistrust.
everyone's got half the story, not the full story. So how would anyone be able to make any decisions?
Exactly.
There seems to be a kind of a different way of getting to a similar place in terms of the work that I've been doing, whereby I'm trying to deliberately get the person to kind of reconsider the take that they've got, and like you, to increasingly consider the perspective and situation of the other. You seem to be saying that if I kind of explain to them the upside of doing this amicably, because that's freed them up, they can then consider how they might think more positively about the other person. So you're kind of fixing the situation and expecting them to feel better and therefore get on better, perhaps?
Not necessarily. I just think as a lawyer, I've got one skill set, which is to let people know what the law says in their situation. And I should enable them to access that without making their relationship worse in the meantime.
So I suppose maybe I even have less faith than you do in people's capacity to kind of get there by themselves. I think what you're saying is inform them and have them understand what could happen if they went the other way, and give them an opportunity to kind of consider, you do want to do that, rather than what I would kind of think was they're not about to think well. I see no evidence of them thinking well, so I kind of feel this sense of doing something about how they're thinking, rather than sort of you're kind of optimistic perhaps that they're going to get there.
Well, there's two different things here. So I think you're thinking very much on co-parenting lines, whereas actually a huge amount of the work we do is on finances. So, when it comes to the division of finances, it's absolutely crucial that people get financial consent orders. And what's really, really worrying is that a lot of couples approaching divorce who don't have legal advice or can't afford legal advice, they go on the gov.uk website, they make an application for divorce, and they get a final divorce order. They get a conditional order, then a final divorce order. And understandably, because it's called a final divorce order, they think they're done. But they've not resolved their financial claims. So their financial claims remain alive, which means in 10, 15 years' time, one of them can make a claim against the other, and people don't realise that. It means that, predominantly women are really disadvantaged when it comes to pension sharing. There are lots of issues with that. And when it comes to finance, there is, a narrow bracket of answers in every case. And it is just money. And it is about enabling people to know what that answer is. And that doesn't depend on them in the future having a good relationship or going through the process wanting a better relationship. Yeah. It's just a legal answer. When it comes to co-parenting, I agree with you. It's really a lot about their motivation and about their relationship, which quite often isn't a lawyer's job, and it's our job to say, look, these are the people you need to talk to help you with that relationship. But when it comes to the finances, actually, motivation is much less important. A relationship is much less important than just having a joint aim of we need to sort the finances out and we need some help with it. And there is a legal answer here and we need to understand what it is.
I suppose that sometimes we notice that if we're very child-focused and raising the awareness of the parent to the fact that if they get on well with each other, the child will thrive. And sort of making sure both parents are very clear that if during some sort of financial negotiation you prioritise that other person's happiness, welfare, then you'll end up with happy kids. So we're kind of saying, if you look after her or him while you work this finance stuff out, your kids will go to both houses feeling they don't have a care in the world and they'll thrive. So I think we're kind of trying to motivate them to kind of do the right thing financially by pointing out that not doing so will be a price that the children will have to pay.
I think that it's so right that if you're a family with children approaching divorce, which obviously not all couples are, but if you are, and you have that lodestar from the beginning, which is that we're still a family. That is our ultimate priority. We're still a family. Then that will, in a really good way, infect the financial negotiations. And I think it's really important to say that that doesn't mean being unfair to yourself. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to be overly generous.
Like
it just
compromise
means, yes, it doesn't exactly,
too much.
because that's also
That won't last either.
no. And you know, ultimately, and again, that's why the sooner that you know, like, what's a fair financial outcome legally, then you're not going to start playing bartering those cards, because actually we've got our lodestar from the beginning, which is that we are a family, we remain a family. We don't know what's financially fair. We'd quite like to get some advice on that. But this is really the footnote to what really matters, which is that we are still a family. And we've got financial needs, they need to be met. How best can they be met? But we're not conflating that with the much bigger thing of how we keep being a family. You know, I wish that family law was as boring as conveyancing, you know, where people were like, you know, because conveyancing is so boring. And, you know, if people viewed the legal process on divorce as almost like conveyancing, like there's a legal bit and we just need help getting through that.
But it's not the main bit.
But it's not the main bit. And actually it's the boring bit. And let's just leave that to the boring lawyers to do the boring bit and tell us what the answer is. And let's focus all our energies on the interesting bit, which is the relationship, and which, when you have children, is your family. You know, if that were the core of it and the lawyers were just there beavering away on asset schedules, I mean, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. And I suppose it's exactly what you're saying, that you don't need to be, the lawyers and everything doesn't need to be the main section of this. We are just an aspect of it. We'll deal with the finance part, and we can do that better when it's fair and there's one lawyer, one couple. So we can do that more amicably already. We've figured that out. We've shown that. And then when there needs to be talk about the children or parenting going forward or the solution of that, we can have a collaborative sense of, here, what about Bill, for example?
It seems that in this country, that's not something that's intuitively where people will go. Like, you happen to go to a lawyer who happens to be very wise and aware of the fact that there's more needs to be done in terms of the relationship. Well, great. But what about the fact that lots of people don't see a lawyer like that? Or what about the fact that some people don't see a lawyer at all? So, you know, at the moment, there is no kind of fairly predictable way whereby they're going to get to work on that. So a lot of people might go through the entire process of separating and never once think about how they're going to parent and how they're going to treat each other. And so there seems to be something kind of systemically problematic with that.
I agree. And it's funny because, you know, I get a lot of friends who are going through separation, and I spoke to one recently, and she's in the very early days, and we were in a coffee shop, and I said to her, the most important thing is that you remain a family. And I said, the children, you know, and I am not a co-parenting expert at all, so but I said, you know, from the children's perspective, wouldn't it be great if this were just a footnote? You know, they just want to know that you've got this, that it's under control. And why don't you know, and she was talking about when they're going to tell the children, we talked about maybe them finding one of their favourite restaurants. And I said, you know, you should go with your husband to the restaurant first, pick the table, practice the meal, have that as your place that maybe once a month you go for a touch base about the children. Do the work alongside, leave the finances for now. There's nothing urgent in the finances. Do the work with a co-parenting expert. In fact, I've sent them to you, Bill, but so that they've got that lodestar.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, every time, because there will be moments, particularly on the finances, when there'll be something that could trigger you to go a different route, and you never know what it's going to be. But if you just remember in the back of your mind that restaurant, that table, your family, that will get you through this. And how amazing to be able to navigate a separation, knowing that you're modeling for your kids, because one day they're going to have relationships that don't work and they're going to think, well, how do we get through this? And they're going to think, oh, well, I remember mum and dad.
They sorted it. They were fine.
Yeah, how amazing is that?
I think that amazing advice, and you be a very good co-parenting advisor, I tell you that. But the also part of that is, I think you said this before, and I think you said this at the beginning as well, that why do we not look at divorce the same way as we look at maybe someone moving country, or, you know, why is it seen as this kind of stigmatized, you know, awful thing? You know, you say, oh, you're getting a divorce, and someone goes, oh my gosh, like,
yeah, how awful.
Oh, how awful. Or you say that you work in divorce, and someone goes, oh, like, you couldn't do that. And so there's definitely this stigma around it. But if you approached it with your family and your kids and your friends, like you would approach someone moving abroad. So if your partner was moving abroad, how would you approach that? You would probably sit down the kids and you'd say, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be really fun because you get to go to so-and-so's in Australia. And then, you know, you'd say to your friends, well, actually, this is going to be good in this factor and that factor. And you have a really positive outlook on it. Why do we not do the same with divorce, even though it could be really good for families sometimes? As you said, conflict is the main thing. Arguments are the main thing that cause distress in children. So when they have a divorce, maybe that will solve that problem. So that could actually be a really good endpoint for the family. It could be a really positive thing. But people don't really see that as a venture or a way of perceiving it. And I think that's something that's in the UK culture that really needs to change.
I agree. I mean, it's funny because I often think about, you know, if you say to friends, you know, I'm moving jobs, nobody would turn around and go, I can't believe you've done that to your boss. Right, would they? Or like, you know, oh my God, what about your co-workers? Like, really? Like, are you sure? Like, this seems like a big deal.
Gosh,
you know,
no.
But people presume to be entitled to have an opinion about your relationship, and nobody chooses, like, just for a laugh, to end a relationship. You know, it's a really big decision, quite often the result of years of soul searching. And we're all on this earth for a limited period of time. It's the pursuit of happiness. You know, everybody just wants some joy. And if you can get to the end of your life with 2, maybe 3 relationships which have been wonderful and successful and brought joy, then in my book, you're doing a hell of a lot better than somebody who's stayed in a relationship for 60 years and been bitterly unhappy.
Yeah, and you've done a lot more for your kids as well.
Yeah, and just for, you know, just humanity generally. I mean, we just all want to bring joy. You know, we all know those people that when they walk into the room, like, all the flowers die. Like, you don't want to be that person. So
no, you don't.
If that's what a relationship is doing to you, then don't stay in it, and don't do that thing where you say, well, I'll stay in it for the children, or, you know, stay in it until, you know, my mother passes away, or, you know, it's actually, that's corrosive. And I think that there's a lot of fear about divorce because of the legal process. And I think that, you know, we have a lot of responsibility as lawyers to fix that. But I also think that, you know, it's back to Henry VIII, isn't it? It's so stigmatized, divorce, and it just really shouldn't be anymore.
And when you talk about that kind of, like, you know, be the happiness, and also that it's the place of lawyers to kind of change the stigma around what actually law and divorce is about. Is there room for happiness in this kind of family law space? You know, like that feeling that you can go into that room and have somewhat a positive experience? Yeah,
I mean, we get happy couples. But you know, it's a tough transition. So it doesn't, I guess what I'd say is it doesn't have to not be happy. You know, there's no rule that says it has to be miserable. And I think the more that, as I say, we can just let people navigate it and go through the emotions they need to go through without the legal process making it worse. And I think that is a really low bar to say, I just want to not make things worse. But it's amazing how often the legal process does make things worse. And that's something that has to change.
Do you think in terms of change that something should be coming down from above? Like, do you think that change needs to be sort of legislated or kind of enforced, or at least thoroughly encouraged?
Yeah, I think that the more that we can enable people to navigate divorce without an adversarial element, the better. So no-fault divorce was fantastic when that legislative change came in, because it means that couples can, A, not give reasons for divorce because it's nobody else's business but your own, and they can apply for divorce together. So that starts the process together, and it's not somebody divorcing somebody else and this feeling of, one person being the applicant and the other one responding, and the idea that, you can just get a letter land on your doormat saying, your husband or your wife has applied for divorce. I mean, how awful. So the no-fault divorce legislation, I think, is a huge shift, and that will really help. I do think that more and more of the couples we see coming to the divorce surgery are coming saying they want to share a lawyer. So they're not coming as they were at the beginning saying, what is this? We need to explore it. We want to understand what it is. They're coming going, we know what this is and this is what we want.
Yeah. So
and I think that's interesting.
A kind of a knowledge that has kind of seeped into society's kind of consciousness. They do know something now that they didn't know before. You still get sometimes someone will come who doesn't know about it, but you are noticing that. So do you think there needs to be like some sort of endorsement of that? Some sort of, I mean, like in Australia it became law. You couldn't go to a lawyer until you'd been through a comprehensive process.
Yeah.
You just couldn't even begin.
Yeah.
Do you think something like that should happen here? I mean, it's great that this grassroots movement is occurring, but maybe not as quickly as it could. Should it be more endorsed?
I think it's in terms of what the ideal for every couple would be. I think the ideal would be not to start in the legal process unless their safety is at risk. To start in a process which enables them to navigate the relational elements of it. And when I say that, I mean just come to terms with the fact that this relationship is at an end. Do we need to agree? I sometimes call it a divorce story, but really all that is, we need to agree something that we're going to tell our family and friends. And that can be as basic as, you know what, we were married for 10 years. We're really proud of what we've done in terms of our children. And, those little quotes you see on Instagram when celebrities split up. But just to have something that you can literally parrot out to your friends and family. There isn't a drama. We're going to work through this together. We just want a bit of time. And that's not legal. And, figuring out co-parenting plans and how you're going to divide the time between the children, how you're going to tell the children about the divorce, how you're going to navigate their questions. That's not legal. Again, that's...
How does that happen? I mean, do you try to go to a lawyer and the lawyer say, no, look, actually, you can't really, I'm not who you need right now. You can come back.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
So how does that, I mean, I guess the lawyers would be quite reluctant to say, actually, I don't want the work that you're about to give me.
Well, I guess it depends what kind of lawyer you are. But, certainly for the divorce surgery, if you've got a process which we do, which is fixed fee, and, the couple can spend as much time with their in-house solicitor as they need, their shared solicitor, and then they'll get a barrister giving them advice. It's really, really important for us that when couples come, they're ready for the legal process.
Because it's not about the hours that you spend with them.
No, because we're not charging hourly rates. So if they're not ready, it's not in our interest, it's not in their interest, and the process might not work. So we're highly motivated, and we'll get lots of people phoning up. We've got a kind of client relationship non-lawyer team who answer the phone, who get calls, every day from people. And some of them will literally say, I found out yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
And, for those people, that's an unbelievably amazing opportunity for us to be able to say, here you go. This is what you need. Don't come to us yet. So, provided your safety's not at risk, here are some names of divorce coaches. Here are some names of co-parenting counsellors. Here are lots of names. And sometimes people get worried about cost. But it's understanding that actually, in quite a lot of cases, if it's early enough, it's one meeting.
Yeah.
It's one meeting to set you on the right track when it comes to talking to your children about divorce. It's one meeting to help you sit down together and really have an opportunity with somebody else to explain why this relationship is over. Because particularly if you weren't expecting it and you're totally blindsided, you need that opportunity to hear in a safe, structured way.
Yeah.
And the more that you can enable people to spend the first 2 or 3 months after separation not thinking about the legals, get them out of that flight or fight mode.
Yeah.
And then once they're ready to make long-term decisions about the finances and possibly their children, but they might have sorted that out already, then they come back. So I think it's, it's really about what, if you're a lawyer that's just thinking, I need to get them to legal advice, and they come in the door and they're clearly not ready for legal advice, then you really should be sending them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really refreshing, actually. It's been really, really interesting talking with you. So thank you so much for coming in. And yeah, that's us. I think we're hitting the 60-minute mark. So thanks for joining us on Conflict to Connection. We hope today's episode gave you some fresh insights to help you navigate your journey. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe or follow the podcast and leave a review. For more resources and support, follow us at Civilized Separations on Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn. You can also visit our website at civilizedseparations.co.uk. See you next time, where we'll be exploring ways to build stronger connections for a brighter future.